Our semester had just ended, and my friend and I decided to take a spontaneous 3-day trip. Neither of us planned anything. We just needed a break, an escape from the constant pressure of university life. No itinerary, no expectations, just peace and change. We arrived on the first day and spent it wandering aimlessly, soaking in the unfamiliar scenery. By evening, we asked a few locals about interesting spots and decided on a destination for the next morning. But the next day didn't go as planned. We took the wrong bus, completely the opposite direction of where we intended to go. Surprisingly, we weren't bothered. The detour felt like part of the adventure. A new place meant new experiences. It was close to lunchtime when we got off the bus. The sun blazed overhead, and we strolled along the street, searching for a restaurant before heading back to the bus stop. The heat was stifling. We stopped at a small drink stall. My friend went inside to buy something cold while I waited outside, glancing around to spot any decent place for lunch. That's when I noticed it. Tucked between two worn-out buildings was a small, dim storefront. The signboard outside read, "Local Toy Museum, collection from around the world." The display was modest. A faded banner, a few glass figurines behind dusty windows, but something about it pulled at me. As I leaned in to read the details on the board, a voice called out. Startled, I turned. Beside the entrance, a narrow counter jutted out, and behind it sat an elderly man wearing a straw hat. His back was hunched, his face hidden as he leaned over the table, looking like he was reading something. His hand moved slowly across the surface, deliberate and quiet. He asked if I was interested in the museum. I hesitated. He said the ticket was $5. Not expensive, but I wasn't that curious. Before I could reply, he told me it would be free, that the collection inside would be happy to see me. His voice was deep, dry, and unhurried. I was about to decline when my friend returned. His eyes lit up at the sight of the museum. I told him the old man offered us free entry. He grinned, gave me a wink, and pushed open the door. A cold gust of air greeted us. The smell inside was musty, thick with dust and thyme. The temperature was surprisingly low, perhaps to preserve the collection, I thought. The floor was covered in faded red carpet. Worn down and stained in patches. Shelves lined the room, each packed with toys and dolls locked behind glass cases. Their wide, permanent smiles unsettled me. Some had large, glassy eyes that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the dim light. As we explored deeper, the silence grew heavier. A creeping discomfort settled in my chest. It felt like the dolls were watching me. Every step I took, I felt their gaze. As I leaned closer to one of the glass display cases, trying to get a better look at the toys inside, one of the dolls suddenly fell forward in its case, striking the glass with a sharp tap. I startled and took a step back in fright. I called out to my friend, hoping to shake the feeling. He shouted back, excited, saying he found something special. His voice sounded nearby, so I followed his direction. He said he'd stay put and wait for me. We spoke as we moved, separated by shelves, but his voice never faded. In fact, it seemed to grow closer, though I still couldn't see him. The museum was larger than I'd expected, with long, winding corridors that felt endless. Finally, I reached a dead end. A plain wall stood before me, no collections in sight, but I could still hear his voice. He told me he could see me through the gap in the shelf and said I should turn right and head down a corridor beside me. I turned. There it was, a hallway, completely dark, no lights at all. It didn't feel like part of the exhibit. My gut twisted, something was wrong.
I hesitated in the silence. The air around me felt heavier, as if the shadows themselves were pressing in. A faint hum buzzed in my ears. Was it the building, or just my nerves? My heartbeat grew louder, thudding like footsteps on hollow wood.
He called my name again, urging me to follow. I hesitated. Suddenly a tap on my shoulder. Cold, light, real. My body froze as I slowly turned around. My friend stood there, looking puzzled. Beside him was a man with a stern face. I recognized neither his clothes nor his expression. I stared in confusion. I'd heard my friend calling me from the corridor. Loud, clear, but he was behind me. My friend looked at me like I was the strange one. He said he hadn't heard a single word from me since we stepped into the museum. The next thing he knew, I was standing alone at the far end of the exhibit, staring into the dark. The man beside him frowned, clearly annoyed. He said we shouldn't have entered without paying. He had stepped out briefly for his break. I tried to explain that the old man at the counter had let us in. My friend's confused expression deepened. We walked together to the counter. The man stepped behind it and reached down. My breath caught. There was no old man, just a mannequin. Bent over the counter, straw hat on its head, one hand rested on an open newspaper, perfectly posed. I stood there, stunned. I had spoken with it, heard it invite me inside. The man, annoyed but not surprised, said nothing. We apologized, paid the entrance fee, and left. On the bus ride back, I tried to explain the strange encounter to my friend. I said it must have been a prank. Someone swapped the old man with the mannequin before we returned to the counter. A cruel joke to spook us. But my friend only stared at me, confused. He thought I was pranking him. He said when I mentioned the old man offered free entry, he had already seen it was just a mannequin. He thought I was joking the entire time. I was stunned. But my friend's expression was serious. There was no hint of a joke. Yet I clearly remembered the old man inviting us in. We spoke, even if only for a few words. I tried to explain, but I didn't even know where to start. In the end, I just sat in silence.